In this unit, we are going to be going over the concepts of counseling and coaching. And specifically, we're going to look at one strategy that can be used in both of these disciplines, something known as motivational interviewing, which can really help guide our clients to make decisions and make plans and find their own motivation to participate in the behaviors we'd ideally like them to participate in. Before I get there, I just want to differentiate between these terms, coaching and counseling. I'm going to sometimes use these terms interchangeably, but they're slightly different. So I just want to clarify the difference. Okay, so coaching is all about partnering with your clients in a way that inspires them to maximize their potential or their performance. So traditionally we think of coaches and we think of like athletic coaches, like team coaches, but you'll see the word coach pop up a lot more these days and people calling themselves health coaches or life coaches and whatnot. And in this respect, what coaches do is they provide support to enhance skills, resources, and creativity that a client already has. So they basically guide a person to maximize their own potential. They offer feedback, they offer guidance, but it's really forward looking. It's not really at all about the past. It's really about like usually goal specific or goals specific. Okay, so coaching is really focused on goal setting, about formulating a plan that really takes into account the client and their own particular situation and their strengths and limitations. It's about accountability, like check-ins, like how you doing? We said we were going to do that last week. How did it go? Those kind of things to offer more structure, encouragement, and support. Okay, so again, like I said before, coaches are really like outcome focused and they're really like goal focused and future focused. So counseling can also be about that, can also be about setting goals and future orientation, but it's often a little bit more about like fixing some of the things that have gone on in the past that's limiting our growth. Okay, and also with counseling, there's often way more of a mental health perspective. So counselors typically go through more schooling than coaches. It depends, but often it depends on the level of counselor as well. But they're often trained in mental health. They're trained in a lot more of psychological and human development practices. And they focus on like typically fixing some of the things that have gone on in our past that are limiting our present or are limiting our future. Okay, but again, it's a little bit more past oriented. Okay, but it really depends what type of counselor and what type of coach. So we can't there's a lot of overlap between these two disciplines. Okay, so they're both focused on life changes, either the present or the future, and facilitated by either the counselor or the coach. Like I mentioned, counseling is typically past focused, while coaching is typically future focused. In general, counselors have more accreditation than coaches. There are higher level coaching programs, some that are really good, and they have a lot of psychological and behavior change principles embedded into them, some that are really expensive too. But in general, counselors usually go through a lot more schooling to call themselves a counselor. So you could argue that they have a lot more of the skills or the know-how or best practices for doing what they need to do. Okay. Something else about counseling is it's more of a long-term process. Coaching could just be you could have one session with a fitness coach or a life coach or a health coach, whereas counseling might take longer to get to the root of that problem. Okay. They both rely on positive psychology techniques, but often a counselor has more of a broader scope of that. And like it just says here, coaches are typically more limited in their scope and ability. So counselors are typically have more qualifications, they have more accreditation as well, and they're limited typically by a body that they are part of typically. Whereas coaches, there's less regulation in the industry, and that's why you see just there's some great coaches. There's some coaches that like will transform your lives even without any like really formal education, and there's some that don't know what they're doing and they can actually cause more harm than good. So it really just have to be careful when you are deciding on one or the other, and also deciding on which kind of one you might want to be if this is something you're looking towards. Okay, so as we move forward, I'm going to talk a little bit more about these disciplines, and quite honestly, I'll use the term coaching and counseling similarly, because with our conversations about physical activity, they're both, if you use a counselor for physical activity or a coach for physical activity, it's still more forward-looking than past-looking, okay? However, one of the things I just want to address before we move on is that there's kind of two issues that we see keep coming up in this area of, let's say specifically, fitness coaching or counseling. So there is a lot of info out there, there's a lot of people out there that don't have the background, don't have any scientific knowledge or any kind of accreditation or any kind of degree, but they're really good at marketing themselves. They're really good at like having good branding and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes these people are still like, they actually do a good job, but some of them also, they're spreading misinformation, or they are using guilt and shame to motivate, or they're sometimes causing more harm than good because they just don't have the background, okay? And that's sometimes how misinformation spreads. So what we call that is they have flash but no substance. Alternatively, there's a lot of really like people that have done their homework, they have the background, they have the scientific information, they know best practices, but they don't know how to market themselves. And they might just rely on facts to motivate people instead of like emotions or like things that kind of get into people's hearts a little bit more. And so what we call this is substance but no flash. And you could argue that substance and no flash is kind of better because there's still substance. But if you are thinking of becoming a coach or some sort of counselor as well, just know that people respond to flash as well. So having kind of a combination of both might make you a little bit more marketable, but it really depends on how you want to position yourself. Okay, so some things to think about before we move into kind of some specific styles of coaching and counseling and that concept of motivational interviewing, which I brought up before.